Hi, everybody. Welcome to Talking Data Equity for Friday, June 14th. My name is Heather Kraus, and I am very, very happy to have you all joining us today for a fantastic edition of Talking Data Equity. If this is your first time at Talking Data Equity, welcome. We are always happy to see new people. Talking Data Equity is an event that's run by my organization, which is We All Count, a project for equity in data. And what we do at Talking Data Equity, which is most Fridays at this time, noon Toronto time, is that anybody from any sector, any discipline, any part of the world that's working on trying to align what they're doing with their data projects with the values and communities that they're prioritizing in their data projects can talk about how it's going. We can talk about the practice, the concrete things that are working, the challenges that aren't working, and also remember that you are not trying to do this alone. There are other people in your discipline, there are other people in your area, and learn from each other. The reason we record this is to share it on the We All Count Data Equity Community Forum, which I just shared a link to. Because there's actually lots of people that are working on equity in their data projects that can't attend at this exact time of day, but they really find a lot of value and usefulness and comfort and camaraderie in being able to watch the videos. So feel free to pop over into the forum if you ever want to look at a video or share a video. The forum is not a membership site. You don't have to pay money to join. It's open to the public, so you can just find all of our recordings there. And sometimes for our Talking Data Equity session, we talk about a specific topic like how to collect demographic data or what's going on with adding new categories to what the US federal government is doing, or what do we do with really small sample sizes when we want to use statistics, or what the heck is Bayesian analysis and should I be using it? Sometimes we do techniques, sometimes we have special guests. And today we have a really, really awesome special guest. We have waited many, many months to find a Friday that Dr. Washington could join us because Dr. Washington is extremely, extremely busy. So I'm going to introduce you to our special guest in just a minute. But just to let you know what the logistics look like, this is a Zoom meeting. So you have control over your camera and your microphone. And you can have your camera on or off, whichever makes you most comfortable, makes you feel good and connected. And we do ask that you keep your microphone turned off while our special guest is showing their slides and sharing their stories. Then at the end, when we have time for a little bit of Q&A, if you want to turn your mic on, that's the time to turn your mic on. But in the interim, feel free to use the chat. You can use the chat function to ask questions, make comments. If you want to ask a question privately, you can always set the Zoom chat menu to my name, which is Heather Kraus, and you can put your question to me and I'll still amplify it, but I won't attach your name. So enough about the housekeeping. I am really, really excited to be able to introduce you to Dr. Joyee Washington, who is a special guest that has been recommended and requested by dozens and dozens of you. She produces one of my very, very favorite podcasts called the Public Health Joy Podcast that if you're not already listening to, I highly recommend it. And there's archives that you can go through as well. But that's, of course, not all that Dr. Washington's doing. She is a community engaged research consultant from Jackson, Mississippi. And in 2020, she founded the Joyee Washington Consulting with a mission to revolutionize public health by transforming public health research into life-changing public health solutions. See how cool this is? Dr. Joyee works with community-based organizations, nonprofits, public health organizations, and academic institutions to help them build meaningful community partnerships, conduct impactful research, and create data-informed solutions. Dr. Joyee has over 18 years of research experience and 10 years of public health experience. Her education background is that she has a PhD in education with an emphasis on research, evaluation, statistics, and assessment, and is a master certified health education specialist who has served as coordinator of community-based participatory research, coordinator of community outreach for health resources, and a faculty member at the University of Southern Mississippi in the Department of Public Health. Dr. Joy believes that a healthier and equitable future lies in the power of our communities. So you can already see why I'm a huge fan. And I'm going to put the link in the chat to Dr. Joy's sorry. I'm going to put it in the chat in a second, where you can find out more. You can learn about the podcast, but I'm going to talk less right now and welcome, Dr. Joy. Thank you so much for making time in what I know is an incredibly busy life.
Absolutely. And thank you all for having me. Thank you all for requesting me. For those of you who did, this is going to be a very conversational, very interactive way of discussion around public health and equity and work with our communities. So as Heather mentioned, I'm from Mississippi. I don't know, drop a 1 in the chat for me if you know anything about Mississippi. Do I have anybody from Mississippi? Anybody? Drop a 1 for me. Okay, somebody been to Jackson. All right, all right. So if you know anything about Mississippi, you probably know that number one, we are the hospitality state. Let's start with a positive. Okay, let's start with our strengths. We are the hospitality state. But also, okay, I see them coming in now. We got somebody from Alabama, next door in Louisiana. Awesome. But you also probably know that being in the Southern United States, Mississippi often falls on the bottom of the list for everything good, right? Everything related to health. You probably hear about our Black maternal health stats are not very good. We have a lot of closures when it comes to hospital clinics or hospitals and clinics. We don't have as much access, right, to healthcare, especially being a rural state. Many of our rural communities don't have access to the things that we need to have access to so that we can be healthy. And so one of the ways my approach to things is research is important, right? But we also know that research, particularly in our Black and Brown communities, has been harmful, right? There has been super traumatic things that have happened historically with our communities. But before we get into all of that, I want to ask you another question. So if you're away from your computer or anything, you might want to come back to the chat. So I'm going to, and we'll kind of do this a couple of times throughout as well. But hopefully you can see my screen. And so I want to ask you, what is the first word that comes to your mind when you hear the word research? Right. See some stuff coming into the chat. Data, right? Academic, study, knowledge, reading, a lab coat. I miss wearing my lab coat sometimes. I'm not gonna lie. I miss working in the lab. Numbers, career. Oh, I see somebody said disconnected. That is a good one. Scientists, methods, gathering information, right? I see so many good things in the chat. But here's the thing. Everything that we do in research ultimately needs to lead to some type of solution, right? But we want to make sure that we're doing and creating these solutions for the right reasons and building it on the right foundation. But what I've learned in my time, especially as a community engaged researcher, is that there's this one word that we don't associate with research enough, that we need to start associating with research more, right? And that word is relationship. Okay. So we need to take a better understanding of what it means when research meets relationship and what happens when we start working with our communities, building relationships with our communities, and start approaching research, specifically public health research, right, from a place of love and joy and relationship, and what are we actually trying to work towards? You know, a lot of times in my work, we talk about equity a lot, right? We're talking about data equity today. We talk about health equity a lot. What I've learned is that we don't really know what that means. We really don't know what that means. We don't know what that looks like because we haven't even really seen it, right? So we have to start looking at and thinking about, what does equity look like in everyday practice, right? And I like to say all the time, equity is a verb. Equity is a verb. We have to show equity in our actions. And the only way that we can show equity in our actions is if we learn how to build relationships, right? How do we expect people to know how to build on equity, right? How to build health equity when equity is supposed to mean that we are making sure that everyone has the best possible chance of achieving optimal health, no matter what their race is, no matter what their background is, no matter what their socioeconomic status is. But that means we've got to humanize research, right? We can't look at the data and the numbers by itself. People are not data points. There's lived experience, there is human connection, there are relationships that have to be built if we want to see research go in the direction that it needs to go. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I like to say that this is a revolutionary approach to research. When you start looking at community engaged research, community-based participatory research, when you start looking into the history of it, it really hasn't been around that long. It really started in the 1990s. That's when we kind of saw it come around, come on the scene, was in the 1990s. At least from my research, that's what I found. I hadn't really found anything before that point. And even when that did come around to that point, we still have had a long way to go. And we're still in the beginning of this process. And a lot of it is decolonizing, right? A lot of my journey, a lot of my process in being a researcher, I had to realize that, oh, I am a colonized researcher. So now I have to do the work to decolonize myself, to unlearn that research is not just academia, it's not just data, it's not just numbers. I had to go through a process of unlearning to understand, how do we build these relationships, right? And how do we make sure that we're building the right foundation for our research? So I'm not going to get into all this. I had a little bit, Heather did a great job of introducing me, so I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on what we do at Joy Washington Consulting. But like Heather mentioned earlier, our purpose is to transform public health research into life-changing public health solutions. And at the end of the day, we want to be able to use research as a tool that puts our communities in the position of getting all of the joy in their lives that they deserve, right? It goes beyond equity, right? Equity is part of the process, but at the end of the day, I'm from Mississippi. I was born and raised in Mississippi, okay? I am still here, and I am here intentionally. And I am here because this is my community, this is my family, this is my friends, this is my kinfolk, okay? So I am here because I want to see my community be better. I want to see my community change. And I want to see the people in my community experience joy. It's not joyful when you are a pregnant mom and you don't have a healthcare facility to go to. You can't even experience that bundle of joy that you have and experience the process because you can't get to the clinic. You can't see a doctor. You're scared because you don't know if the doctors are going to believe you, right? That's not a joyful process. So I want to make sure that we have all the information that we need, all the data that we need, so that we can experience the joy that our communities deserve, right? So as we said earlier, the way that we do this is we help organizations make sure that they understand how to build meaningful community partnerships. That comes about with that relationship building process. It comes with building trust, right? Historical mistrust is a real thing. People don't trust researchers. People don't trust clinicians or healthcare providers. They won't go to the doctor. because of so many things that have happened in our past. And so we want to make sure that we're working with organizations or entities to focus on how do we build trust? How do we build those relationships? And it's not easy. If you think about any relationship you had with your mama, your daddy, your granddaddy, grandmama, auntie, uncle, friends, relationship building is hard, right? So we want to make sure that we're able to navigate those complex challenges. Then we want to make sure that we're conducting impactful research, and specifically research with a positive impact, because research has had an impact. It has not all been positive. And we have to be willing to acknowledge what are some of the negative things that are happening, and how do we acknowledge it and work to make sure that it does not happen again, right? And then what we want to do is use those research findings to then create solutions, because oftentimes that becomes the problem, is that we have the research, we got the data, but then somehow for some reason it does not make it into solutions for our communities, right? And we want to make sure that we're not just equipping public health researchers or public health professionals, but we are focused on equipping our community partners, because we want to be able to move to a point where we are focused on community-led researchers, and or community-led research that is led by our community partners. And we want to be able, for those of us who are consider ourselves public health researchers, public health professionals, public health practitioners, that we are more so in the seat of facilitator, right? We're here to be a resource to the community when they need us, right? So that's kind of what we focus on. So we're going to move into another interactive activity. If you have moved away from your computer, please come back. Please come back to the screen, right? So I am going to show you all a picture. All right. This picture changed everything for me when I went into my public health program, and I knew that I was going to be do something. I don't think at the time I knew that I was going to be a public health researcher. I just knew I was going to be doing something in public health. But this picture changed everything for me. And I'm going to go ahead and warn you, it's a sketch drawing, so it might be a little hard to see. It might take your eyes a little bit of time to adjust and realize what's happening. But when you look at the picture, I want you to tell me what is the first things that stand out to you when you see this picture. All right, y'all ready? Drop a 1 for me in the chat if you're ready, so I can make sure y'all at the computer or on your phone or at your device. Right? Okay. All right, so this is the picture. As you are looking, go ahead and put in the chat, tell me what you notice. So we notice there's a baby, right? There are walls, there's a crying baby. We've got a sharp knife. It's a mess, sadness, there are cracks in the walls, it's chaotic. Looks like the kids are struggling. There's some pizza around. There's a woman with her foot on the table. Everything looks dysfunctional. All right. There's a kid in the corner, overwhelmed. Okay. So now what I want you to do, okay, let's see, the mom isn't paying attention to the chaos or the kids. So what I want you to do is take a second look at this picture, right? Take a second look at this picture, and the only thing I want you to do is pick out the strengths. Pick out the strengths in this picture. What are the positive things in this picture? And I saw a few in the chat already. Okay, so the baby does have a crib. They do have food. They have access to food. They have access to shelter. They have a furnished home. They are together. They obviously have heat or electricity, right? The TV's on. There's a heater that's on. They do have some clothing, right? There's space to cook. This is what it looks like to transform our thoughts around research. A lot of times when we're doing research, we focus on the deficit. What's the problem? Right? What's the question? Hold on. There we go. And so a lot of times where we focus, we put our attention on the wrong thing, right? we have to start focusing on the community aspect of things. And when we're talking about public health, there's often a difference between public health and community health, right? A lot of times when we're talking about public health, right? Let me go to the next slide. We're talking about promoting and protecting health. We're talking about prevention of sickness and injury. How do we promote wellness, ensuring safety, access to healthcare, and health equity, right? But we have to come to a place where we are applying these public health principles to specific communities, right? And every community is different. Every community has their own unique thing. But what happens is a lot of times researchers have not the best intentions, right? Or they have selfish intentions because they're focused on their grants, or they're focused on the work that they have to do, or the manuscript that has to be written, or getting tenure, whatever the case may be, right? They're not always putting the community first, the community as a priority. And so we have to start looking at what are not the looking at not what are the deficits, right? What is this community lacking, but what are the strengths in this community? What are the positive things that are already in this community? Because when we talk about equity, we're talking about power, right? So researchers and academia, they have a certain level of power, right? But the problem comes into play where these entities and these institutions think that they have greater power than the community, right? And they make the community feel like they are powerless. And I'm very intentional on how I word that. They make them feel like they are powerless, right? When in actuality, our communities already have all the power that they need, right? But something has not happened to tap into that power. Okay. So we really want to make sure that we are going beyond public health and taking a deeper dive into community health. So that means that we're applying some of these public health principles to a very specific group to identify and address their unique concerns as well as their strengths. We're not just focusing on research to determine, to answer the question, right? But we're also focused on how do we build these community relationships? How do we advocate and communicate with our community partners, right? It is a different level and it's a revolutionary way of thinking because we have done research for so long in one particular way, and we haven't taken the time to think about how can this be done differently, right? And we're just now getting to the point where it's coming into play, and community engaged research in public health specifically is going to start taking off in a much different direction than what we have ever seen before. Because we are getting to the point where we're really going to start seeing equity in practice, and we are positioning our communities to take charge, to take ownership of their problems and their solutions, right? And we are equipping our communities to stand up to academic institutions and to stand up to these people who think they have all the power, right? So it makes a difference in how we approach research when we start thinking about things a lot differently and thinking about it from the place of what does this relationship process look like? What does this power dynamic look like? How do we start shifting the power dynamic and shifting the narrative and humanizing and decolonizing and doing all these things so that we can see our communities and see the health of our family and our friends and the people who are all around us? How do we start shifting and making that change so that we can start seeing the joy that we want to see? Right? So that I can see Mississippi get off the bottom of the list, right? So that I can see the families and the communities and the moms and the babies get the health care that they deserve, right? And then there's a whole other conversation around the social determinants of health. We talk about the social determinants of health a lot, right? So when it comes to the social determinants of health, we have to start thinking about all the different dimensions, right, that impact what allows us to be able to be healthy, right? And so in a lot of the projects that I work on with, and I work directly with community-based organizations and nonprofits most of the time. I do work with some academic institutions specifically when they are doing community academic partnerships, right? But a lot of that comes into play with making sure my first priority is what is it that the community needs? What is their priority? What is their perspective? And what are the things that they already have, right? That illustrates they have power, that illustrates that they have these unique strengths, that they can take charge of whatever it is that they need to take charge of. Because at the end of the day, when these academic institutions leave, when the funding runs out, when the money runs out, what happens to the community? They are often left on the side of the road, right? Left in distress, left without a solution, right? And then that's how that mistrust is built. Because then when someone else comes in, they say, oh, well, these researchers came in and they just came in, asked us some questions, took up our time and left. And so we're not going to trust anybody else. But a big part of what I do is educating communities and focusing on that health education piece around how we can use research as a tool, right? Yes, there has been some harm, but this is a tool that you as a community can use. You don't have to lean on the academic institutions, right? You as a community can learn how to create a survey, how to do focus groups, right? How to look at data, how to understand data, how to use charts and graphs. A big part of what I do is research and data literacy for community partners so that they can understand and they can know what are these terms, what do they mean, how do we use these tools. And when a researcher comes in to their community, right, they know what's what and what's not, right? They are able to decipher what is true, what is not. They are able to make informed decisions on whether they want to participate in this research or if they do not want to participate in this research. So that is an extremely important part of building that relationship process and positioning community so that they are able to advocate for themselves, right? So this is just kind of what I like to call the research cycle, right? And I talked a little bit about this earlier, but we typically ask a question, right? Something comes up, we ask a question. Then we conduct the research, right? Then the research leads us to some type of answer. And then we should be using that answer, using the findings from the research to develop a solution. But a lot of times we get stuck somewhere between the answer and the solution. It never makes it to the community. So that's where we want to start changing things. We want to start getting a better understanding of how can we use research, but use that research so that it generates a solution more quickly. And a lot of times it's the barriers in at the institutional level. You got to go through so much red tape at the academic, at the institutional level to get anything done, number one, but things move a lot faster on the community level. And so we can be able to bring some of those tools and resources when it comes to research directly to the community, because there are so many instances where communities have put in solutions so much faster than government, faster than academic institutions, faster than anybody else, because at the end of the day, nobody is going to save us, right? Nobody is going to save us. And if we sit around and wait for somebody else to save us, nothing will get done. So we've got to start taking things in our own hands and figuring out, how do we create solutions? How do we answer the questions that we have? And how do we start generating these solutions, right? So for most people, what is community engaged research and why is it important? We hear about it a lot, right? But the important thing to understand is when it comes to community engaged research, it's a spectrum, right? There's not one way to do community engaged research. And there are a lot of people who think they are doing community engaged research, but they are not. Okay. Community engaged research is not just asking for the community's input. It's putting the community in positions of power, bringing them to the table, having them as decision makers in what happens in the research process, engaging them in every stage of the research process so that a lot of times people are researchers come to the community with what they think needs to be done, right? This is the thing that we want to look at. This is the thing that we think needs to be explored. And that's not exactly what we want to see in community engaged research. What we want to see is we want to see the community say, this is the problem, not the researchers say this is the problem, right? Because when researchers come in and say, this is the problem, the community might not even care about whatever it is that you coming in there talking about because you are an outsider. You do not belong to that community. You have not lived in that community for 10, 20, 30 years. You haven't seen the evolution of that community, right? You come in and you see the buildings are falling apart. There are cracks in the walls, right? There are no sidewalks, right? There are no street lights, right? You might come to the community and say, okay, we want to make this area a little bit more safe, right? We want to come in and put in sidewalks. We want to come in and figure out how we can put in street lights. And the community, I could tell you what my community gonna say. My community gonna say, what you gonna do about these potholes in the street, right? Because it's tearing our cars up. And when the potholes are tearing our cars up, we can't get to the places that we need to get to. An ambulance can't get down the street because the pothole is so big, right? So you have to be able to utilize community engaged research and the principles associated with community engaged research because community members are the experts, not you. And for some people, it's hard to hear that. For other people, they get it, right? But community members are the experts, not you. And I tell people all the time, I'm from the South, so I say ain't a lot. It ain't about you, right? When the community members are the experts, there are things that we can focus on. I talked a little bit about ownership earlier. We can focus on ownership. We can focus on sustainable solutions. We don't want a band-aid. We don't want a quick fix, right? We want to make sure that we have sustainable solutions. We want to make sure that they have the education that they need to make those informed decisions, that they have the support that they need, that they know that they have someone they can call on if they have questions, if they need additional help, if they need additional resources. We want to make sure that they have access to all the things that they need to have access to. We want to make sure that they are the leaders when it comes to health equity and social justice. I don't care how many degrees you got. I got a bunch of them. I still don't consider myself an expert when I go into communities, right? Even communities of my own in Mississippi. Just because I am from Mississippi does not mean that I can go into any Mississippi community or even any Black Mississippi community and say, "Hey y'all, how you doing? I know everything you need because I'm from Mississippi." It does not work like that. If I go to the community across town and I don't live there, I have never lived there, right? Even if we're in the same county, right? But different town, that's a different community. They're going to have different needs. They're going to have different strengths. They're going to have a totally different view and perspective about things. And as I am building that relationship, I honor and recognize them as the experts. That is the first step to building that relationship. And then we can see research take off in a much different way. I'm currently working on a project with the Mississippi Gulf Coast communities. We have a coalition that's focused on Black women's health, Black maternal health, and they have a coalition. I live an hour from the Mississippi Gulf Coast. I cannot go into that community and act like I know what they need. So when I attend the coalition meetings, when we're doing surveys, when we're doing assessments, or we've got focus groups coming up, I'm consistently talking to them. What's going on? What's happening? Tell me about what's going on in your community, right? I'm learning from them, right? Yeah, there may be some research things, right, that they can learn from me, but I am also learning from them. And we can start building that relationship a lot differently. Not only that, but I don't care about them just because of the research. I care about them because they're people. I care about them because they're human. So when I see them at the local Piggly Wiggly, it's a grocery store if you never heard of it. If I see them at the local Piggly Wiggly, if I see them at the farmer's market, if I see them at the local gym, right? I'm asking, hey, how you doing? How's your daughter doing? How's your sister doing? Did you have a good Sunday at church the other week? I know you told me about it. Learn about them as humans. Learn about them as people, right? And then your research can go in a much different collaborative direction when you're focused on that, right? So these are just a few little tips, few little things that I've learned from the foundations of community engaged research, right? So of course our partners are going to be those people or community members that are impacted by a community issue or problem. But your first goal when you are talking about equity, when you're talking about research, public health, is you have to be able to identify who are you working with, right? You want to make sure that you're identifying the partners in your community. Ask them what are the problems they're facing with, understand what makes your community unique. But one of the most important things that I found is that you have to spend time getting to know yourself. Building a relationship in research is not just about building a relationship between you and your community partners or you and your peers or colleagues. You have to do some internal work. And that's probably the hardest part of this process is recognize your privilege, recognizing your biases, check all of that at the door before you even step into the community, right? Assess your position with the community. How are they going to perceive you? And what is that going to look like as you start breaking those barriers? I was sharing at another event this week that when I was a coordinator of a community-based participatory research project, I was working with grandparents who were raising their grandchildren, right? So I stepped into a room. I'm in my 20s at that time, fresh on the public health scene. And you got about a room full of 30 or so African American women between the ages of 50 and 70 plus. My job was to walk in there and have a discussion with them about adolescent sexual health, right? They are already looking at me like, what is this little 20-something coming up in here trying to talk to me about sexual health and talk to me about my grandchildren and what they doing? The wall was already built before I got in the room, right? But I had to do some checking on myself, right? These are from my cultural context, right? In Mississippi, from the South, these are my elders. I am sitting at their feet. I am learning from them, right? And that attitude change for me, I had to do the work. I had to make sure that I was going in there with the right attitude, right? To have that shift. And I'm in here trying to introduce myself saying, well, this is why I'm here. This is what I'm going to talk about. And I could feel the tension building. So I said, okay, you know what? let's do a intro question. I want to learn more about you. I want to get a better understanding of who you are. So as we go around the room, I want you to tell me your name and tell me what was your favorite song growing up. That's all I want to know. Who you are and what's your favorite song growing up. That one question, the floodgates open. They started singing Marvin Gaye. They started singing all the Motown hits. My parents are of that era as well, so I knew the song, so I could sing along. So now, by the time we got to the end of that little warm up, they like, oh, this little 20 something ain't so bad. Not so bad. And we could start building our relationship from there. A few weeks in, they was inviting me to dinner, right? Inviting me to lunch. Come hang out with us. And that's what you have to learn how to do. It's not all about research. It's about who these people are as humans, right? So how can we start fostering these relationships with communities? That was one example, but we've got to start focusing on these strength-based approaches, right? A lot of times, most of the time in public health research, historically, research has been done on communities. We have to make sure that we are aware of our language and make sure that we are doing research by working with our communities and working for our communities, right? Who are we doing this for? We're doing this for them. So we've got to check our assumptions because those assumptions is what creates barriers, right? If I had gone into that room with those older Black women and said, "Oh well, they don't want to hear nothing from me. I don't even know why I'm here." If I had made any type of assumptions, they don't know. I don't even know why I'm here. They don't know anything about this, that, and the other. Why am I creating that assumption? I need to sit down and listen. If I listen to them, listen to their stories, listen to their lived experience, there is so much richness, right? Richness in what we learn from one another, right? We've talked about recognizing community strengths, but also not just involving your community. I said community engagement is a spectrum earlier, right? You have some people who you'll involve the community. You'll ask their opinion on certain things, but engaging your community, that's a whole different level. That takes the relationship building, the trust building, getting to know each other beyond just what you want them to put on the survey or what you want them to tell about in a focus group, right? Focusing on that co-learning piece. Because if we sat down and we really just took time to be quiet, just don't say nothing, you will learn a lot, right? You will learn a lot about yourself and you will learn a lot about other people, right? So, what does this look like in practice? How do we conduct effective community engaged research? Because it is hard. Community engaged research, I tell people all the time, is one of the hardest types of research to be able to implement because you have to deal with this relationship building piece. It's hard, but it can be done in an effective way. And the key to doing that is you have to focus on the sustainability piece, right? We want to make sure that we have these sustainable solutions. And the way that we do that is by knowing the priorities and expectations, not only for your community, but for yourself. What are you expecting from this work, right? What is your community expecting from this work? What's going to happen at the end of this work? Yes, the grant might be for 3 years, right? But what's going to happen 2 years after that? What's the expectation for them? You should be thinking about sustainability before you start writing that proposal, right? Before you're applying for the grant, when you are talking with the community about what they are, what their needs are, and what their strengths are, right? Things change. You have to be aware of what are those kind of evolving circumstances. Nobody knew in 2020 that COVID was going, well, I didn't know. I'm gonna say I didn't know in 2020 that COVID was gonna come. Maybe somebody knew, but I didn't know. Okay, that COVID was gonna come. So we have to be aware of these evolving circumstances. right? Be able to readjust and modify what some of our methods might be, whether it's research, evaluation, or assessment. You got to be able to move with the community. If something happens in the community, especially when it comes to things like natural disasters, right? Other events, whether that's good or bad, right? I know Juneteenth is a big thing that is coming up, right? If you have planned your research and you're saying, oh, we're going to have this particular meeting, community meeting or whatever on Juneteenth, nobody is going to come. Nobody is going to come. Be aware of the historical context. Be aware that things change, right? There may be certain events that are happening, big or small, good or bad, things change. So you're going to have to be willing to change with things, right? And then making sure that you're approaching your research with an equity lens. We need to be able to see equity in every single thing that we're doing. Remember, equity is a verb. So in your actions, you need to be showing equity across everything. Are you doing everything in your power, everything possible to make sure that this interaction with this person is the best that it can be? Right? So, as you are doing that in your everyday life, think about how you apply that to research as well. So, these are just the key strategies, just a recap. Remember knowing your priority and expectations. Make sure you're doing what you can to listen and build trust. Focus on that co learning piece and focus on that sustainability and equity. This is how we get to the point where research meets relationship. All right. If you want to learn more, I'm going to wrap up and so we can get to Q&A. But if you want to learn more about community engaged research in public health, we talked a little bit about the podcast earlier. The Public Health Joy podcast is released every first and third Friday. It is available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And so the very conversation I had with you today is exactly the conversations that we have on the podcast. We bring people on who are doing this work in the community with the community, and what are the solutions that they are bringing? How are they taking these creative and innovative approaches to public health research? And what does it mean to build relationships in research that eventually bring joy to our communities? So you can check that out as well. Also, these are some few helpful resources. I do not have all of them on here. One of them is Community Toolbox, which is a free resource from the University of Kansas. A couple of books that I like is Community Organizing and Community Building for Health and Social Equity, and then Community-Based Participatory Research for Health from Process to Outcomes. And there's also another one that I need to add to this slide, which is Decolonizing Methodologies by Linda Smith. I don't know how to pronounce her the middle name, but I believe the middle name starts with a T. I'll have to get that for you. But Decolonizing Methodologies is the other one that is, I love that book. So those are just some of the resources. If you want to contact me or anything like that, we'll put that in the chat as well. But I'm going to stop share so we can do Q&A.
Thank you so much, Dr. Joy. That was an amazing presentation of so much depth and insight that I am really, really grateful. I'm definitely going to be re-listening to this a few times. And I really, for all of you who are here today, I cannot emphasize how good this podcast is that Dr. Joy consistently produces month after month. I'm a huge podcast consumer, and it is absolutely in my top 2 podcasts. So really check it out. And we'll make sure that you have links to all of the resources that Dr. Joy was sharing too, in case you are on your phone or you're driving or you can't write it down. And so we do have a little bit of time left for questions and answers. So is there anyone in the room that wants to turn their mic on? You can either raise your hand using the Zoom chat function. I mean, the Zoom
Hi.
function, or you can just go ahead.
Hi, hello. Okay. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was really, really enriching for me. So I have a question because I realized you were sharing your experience and your knowledge about starting this process, like the community research, since the moment that you learn who is your community, right? So like we are assuming that we have a community and that they recognize themselves as a community. Maybe not. So that could be another question. But my thoughts are like I'm right now working on on updating a survey. So which is happening now is that there are different groups like with different interests about this survey, and we are not still considering the people who we are going to serve with that survey. So that for me is like, wait, we are missing a part, a group, a very important group of people. But this group of people that we want to collect the information, it is probably a community that is not built, that is not like, they don't recognize themselves as a community. Like they are still getting to know each other. So they still like, they just moved to another country, so they don't feel like they fit in a community, let's say that. So, but we consider them like, that's the community that we serve. So that's like the thought that I have. Like, how do we start working with a community that they don't recognize themselves as a community?
Yeah, well, I
Thank you.
think you brought up a good point, which is how do you define community, right? And so I always say, when in doubt, ask. Ask the experts, right? If they do not, if their definition of community is not your definition of community, then you need to find out what their definition of community is, right? Because you're going based off of your perspective. So you see a room full of Black women, right? And you say, oh, there's a community of Black women. They don't even know each other. Right. So that means whoever you are looking to partner with, you need to ask them and say, hey, we have noticed A, B, and C. We would really be interested in talking to more people. How would you define your community? How do you all relate to one another? Do you all relate to one another? Is there a different definition of community or a different group of people that you connect with, right? Because community is not just geographic, community is not just your cultural or ethnic background. Community could be anything. You could have a community of people. I know for my husband, right? He loves X-Men and like all the anime, all that, whatever. I'm not in that. Yeah, I'm not in that community. I don't know. But for him, that's a community that he's a part of. You can't go based on looks. You can't even sometimes go based on the literature because the literature might be very different from cultural context. So you're going to have to go to those people, whatever your kind of starting point is, and ask, what is your definition of community? I think that's going to have to be the best place where you're going to have to start.
Lovely. Thank you so much.
That's a great suggestion. And I really like Dr. Joy, the call out that just because something is in the literature does not mean it's true. Because a lot of that's very colonized, right? It's through a specific lens. We have time. Hopefully we'll be able to get one more question in the time that we have. Tiala, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Dr. Washington, thank you so much for your presentation today. I really appreciate what you are talking about. One of the things that I know my colleagues and I really struggle with, we work for a local health jurisdiction. We work a lot with community-based organizations and nonprofits. And we really would like to be very much more community-driven and community-led. But I think the reality for a lot of us who work within like federal and state grants is the timeline. And so I'm curious if you have any thoughts or experience on, these ideas of these forced timelines But the reality is that community work takes so much longer. So how do you balance those?
Yes, yes. And I see another chat. I'm not sure if it's Shanna or Shauna. Yes, it does take time and it does take money, right? So trying to align those things can be difficult. There are a couple of ways and things to think about that. Number one is thinking about feasibility and what's going to be realistic based on that time and money that you will have, right? Sometimes we have such a great vision for different things and we're not thinking about the feasibility side on the front end. That's one thing. But the other side of it is it's not on y'all. It's on the funder. It's on the funder. And so we have to start positioning ourselves in our communities to talk to the funders, right? Make these concerns known. Let it be seen that, hey, this is not feasible. We need you all to work with us a little bit differently because we got to work with our communities a little bit differently because we have to be able to meet their needs. We have to be able to work with their strengths. We have to be able to work with their priorities. So a lot of it is conversation driven and a lot of it's a systems issue. It's a systems issue. You can only do the best that you can do with what you have. But the best way to deal with that is on the front end, not the back end. So if you can develop something that's going to be, I tell people when you start applying for grants and proposals, you need 2 years to build relationship alone. You need 2 years at least to build that trust and relationship. So that would kind of be my fast answer. But of course, if anyone needs additional questions or want to talk more about certain things, please feel free to email me. I drop my email in the chat. You can also reach out to me on Instagram and LinkedIn. I'm very active on those platforms as well, and I'd be glad to have a conversation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Joy. As you can see, we could definitely spend the whole afternoon asking you questions and learning more about your work. I know for sure that people will follow up and we will keep promoting your work and your wisdom. We're so grateful for it. Means so much. Adding so much value in a world that really, really needs it. So thank you for spending the time with us today, Dr. Joy. For everybody who came, listened, spread the word, spread the website. And thank you for continuing to come to Talking Data Equity. Of course, we would not have Talking Data Equity without you. So thank you for keeping coming. And have a great rest of your day and a good weekend. Bye, everybody.